The reading material in question is Richard S. Broughton's Parapsychology. It was published in 1991 in July, and I'm going to be reading the introduction. The link to buy the book on Amazon will be linked below in the description. Of course, you can buy it anywhere you can find it. The newspaper reporter sat in front of my desk, flipping through her notepad, looking for any questions she had missed. We had talked for quite a while, and I had shown her several of the experiments underway at the lab. She looked up from the pad, hesitated slightly, and began, "Dr. Broughton, there's just one final question I would like to ask." I knew what was coming, and it was not through ESP, only experience. The Institute for Parapsychology is perhaps the most famous parapsychology laboratory in the world. Parapsychology first achieved worldwide recognition through the work of Dr. J.B. Rhine and the Duke University Parapsychology Laboratory, which he created in 1930. Over the decades, J.B. Rhine, with his wife, Dr. Louisa E. Rhine, and the many researchers who trained and worked at the Duke Lab, created the foundations for the science as we know it today. As J.B. Rhine approached the age of mandatory retirement for Duke, he created the Foundation for Research on the Nature of Man, or FRNM. Upon his retirement in 1965, an agreement with the university made the Institute for Parapsychology, the FRNM's research arm, legal heir to the Duke University Parapsychology Laboratory in terms of both its reputation and records and its modest financial support. With a heritage like that, our lab has become a mecca for journalists working on stories about parapsychology. She continued to ask, "Dr. Broughton, do you believe in this ESP and psychokinesis stuff?" "No, I don't believe in it," I replied, and then I watched the reporter's face take on a familiar, perplexed look. Of course, I then had to explain to the startled reporter that I regard belief as something appropriate in matters of faith, such as in religious questions, but not in a matter of science. One's religious beliefs might require what theologians would call a leap of faith, precisely because there is no evidence to support them. As a scientist, I do not take leaps of faith with my subject matter. I study the evidence. I have been studying the evidence for over 2 decades. My initial readings in the subject convinced me of 2 things. A, there is an enormous amount of evidence for what we call psychic ability that remains to be explained and understood. And B, hardly anyone is doing anything about it. Having spent most of my undergraduate days championing politically unpopular causes, it was but a small step into the arena of the intellectually unpopular, so I ignored all the best advice of my friends and colleagues and embarked upon a career in parapsychology. 4 years in the psychology department of the University of Edinburgh, Scotland, led to a PhD, one of the few in Britain for work that included parapsychology, and that was followed by a couple of years working at Europe's only state-supported parapsychology laboratory at the University of Utrecht, Holland. A stint in ordinary psychology with the State University of New York convinced me that the challenges that fired my scientific curiosity were those of parapsychology. So in 1981, I was happy to accept FRNM Director K. Ramakrishna Rao's invitation to join the world's most famous parapsychology laboratory. Now, as Director of Research, I spend a lot of time with reporters, telling them I am still studying the evidence. Let me assure you, however, that I am not lacking in commitment or passion for my chosen field. It is just that my commitment is not to a set of beliefs or abstract concepts. My commitment is to the scientific process, and my belief, if we may call it that, is that science will ultimately help us understand a wide variety of baffling phenomena and experiences that have been puzzling human beings since time immemorial. Occasionally, you will hear some scientific pundit proclaim there is no evidence for parapsychological phenomena Therefore, parapsychology is a pseudoscience with no subject matter to study. That is patent nonsense. For over 2,000 years, people have been reporting a class of human experiences, the kind commonly called psychic, and for almost as long, scholars and scientists have been trying to understand them. 2 millennia of human experiences is a subject matter. Surveys have repeatedly shown that anywhere from 1/2 to 3/4 of the population have had experiences that they believe were psychic. That constitutes a subject matter with a rather large initial database. There is no doubt that people have experiences that are apparently psychic in nature, and therefore parapsychology does have something to study. The question put to parapsychology as a science is, how are we to explain these experiences? Obviously, the first step in dealing with experiences of this kind is to examine how far normal or conventional mechanisms and knowledge can go in explaining them. Investigators must consider such factors as malobservations, faulty memory, and deceit, and the list can be quite lengthy. If it proves that all normal explanations fail to explain the experience adequately, then what do we have? Actually, all we have at that point is an anomaly, something that science at its present stage is unable to explain. Anomalies are what fuel scientific advances. Facts that do not fit existing theories, observations that cannot be accounted for by current knowledge. These are what continually push forward the boundaries of human knowledge. Anomalies, if they persist, eventually force science to revise its theories and bring about a new and more complete understanding of nature. At any particular time, science is confronted by a variety of anomalies. Meteors, stones falling from the sky, were long dismissed as the ravings of lunatics. X-rays were thought by many scientists to be a hoax. N-rays, also greeted with skepticism, proved to deserve it. The anomalies encompassed by parapsychology are only a small portion of the anomalies that face science today. Persistent reports of unidentified flying objects or unusual creatures also present anomalies, and there are many other less notorious anomalies stretching the imagination of scientists. Undoubtedly, the best way to approach these reports of inexplicable experiences is with a healthy skepticism. I use the word healthy deliberately, for it is all too easy for skepticism to become corrosive. For a parapsychologist, the most important intellectual tool is an appropriate amount of critical doubt. Skepticism can go too far, and many scientists choose to deal with anomalies simply by denying their existence. Even when they cannot deny the experiences or observations that underlie the anomalies, they may force the observations into a more acceptable explanation, no matter how implausible it may be. Parapsychologists and their predecessors, who were called psychical researchers, have chosen to confront some of nature's anomalies that seem most intimately connected with the human mind. To do this, they have posited certain constructs such as extrasensory perception, ESP, and psychokinesis, or PK, to serve as crude hypotheses for what they think might be happening. In so doing, they have embarked upon a research program that undoubtedly must be the longest-running controversy in all of science. Reading the newspapers over the last couple of decades, I have often had the feeling that there is a curious parallel between parapsychology and political scandals. In a political scandal, it almost always seems a rule of thumb that the more vehemently the allegations are denounced, the more likely they are to have struck home. I have often wondered if that same rule could apply to the controversy that surrounds the claims made by parapsychology. That's the introduction. Next is Chapter 1, which is called What is a Psychic Experience? Which is going to do much like what it sounds, is clearly define what parapsychology considers a psychic experience. Again, this was the introduction from Parapsychology by Richard S. Broughton. The link to find it and buy it will be below in the description. And if you enjoyed this, be sure to let me know so I know if you guys want to hear more of it. And girls, you guys and girls. That's about 10 minutes. I think I'll keep these at around 10 minutes. And hopefully for everybody that wanted me to read creepypasta, that this is a pleasant middle ground, a good spot in between pure creepypasta and not reading anything. And thanks to everybody. And while you're at it, toss out ideas for other reading material. Even though I've got tons backed up, I can always add to the list, you know, for eventual recordings, readings. And thanks again. Oh, and go ahead and write everything you found interesting about this in your comments, questions, anything like that, so we can discuss it. Because what's the point if we don't talk about it, right?